Hey everybody, Mr. Quick here. Welcome to Eureka Math / Engage New York Math, Module 4, Lesson 10, Writing and Expanding Expressions. It should be also, I should clarify that writing and expanding multiplication expressions. We're going to get started, but first I want to go over a couple of basics here. If I have two variables, a times b, I know that the two letters are variables because they represent a number, but we don't know what the number is right now. I wouldn't write it like this because the x is confusing, because it's a multiplication symbol, but it looks like an x. So you could look at that and be confused and say, well, that's axb as opposed to a times b. So you might say a times b. If you're going to use that form, make sure you don't have it too low so it doesn't look like a decimal. Right? You could do a b, and that means multiplication. You could also say a b. That's when you have variables. Now, if I have two numbers, 5 times 7, in this case I could use this model. I could say 5 times 7, make sure it doesn't look like 5.7, and I could say 5, 7, and as long as they're both in parentheses, then you know that you are to multiply them together. I would not do, like this one here, wouldn't do 5, 7 in that way because it looks like 57, so that's no good. We're going to talk about a couple of terms here real quick that are going to be important going forward. One is a factor. A factor is just simply two numbers multiplied together. So in that example, 5 times 7. Sorry, so I just had to go talk to my dog because he was freaking out. So I'm not sure exactly where I left off, but talking about factors. 5 times 7 equals 35. 7 is a factor of 35. 5 is a factor of 35. And in this multiplication expression, if I take away the equal sign and just have 5 times 7, those are both considered factors. Here's another problem for you, or another expression, I should say. This is an example of some terms. A term is part of an expression that can be added to or subtracted from the rest of the expression. So, in this expression, 7g is a term, 8h is a term, and 3 is also a term. Now, final thing, we've talked about variables, but when you have a variable in a let me give you the example here. Let's say 4m. This is a variable term, meaning there's a variable, the m, and there's a number. The coefficient is the number. It's a big fancy word basically saying it's the constant factor. So we know that that's 4. M, we don't know what it is. So in this example, if I said what is the coefficient, you would say it is 4 and it is multiplied by m. Those are just some terms you might want to know and we will be using going forward. But first, let's get into today's lesson. It says, write each expression using the fewest number of symbols and characters. Use math terms to describe the expression and parts of the expression. So, in this example, part A, 6 times b. We want to use the fewest number of symbols. So even if we said 6 times b, we're still using 1, 2, 3 symbols, which is not any different than what it is. So to go with the fewest, we'd have to say 6b, which we know means 6 multiplied by b. In this, the coefficient is the 6. It's also a factor. b is a variable because it's a letter that represents a number, and it's also a factor because when you multiply two things together, they're both factors of the answer. We call 6b the product, and we can also call it a term. So when you're multiplying things together, you're trying to get an answer, that would be the product. All right, part B, 4 times 3 times h. We know because of PEMDAS that you multiply, when it's a multiplication problem, you can multiply any of those factors together because the order doesn't really matter. So to make this simple, we're going to do 4 times 3, and we're going to get 12 times h. So that would be our simplest term. 12 is the coefficient. It's also a factor. H is a variable, and it is a factor as well. And 12h is the product, and is also a term. So we get down here. We end up with 2 times 2 times 2 times A times B. We know what these numbers are, and we know we can multiply them because the order doesn't matter. So 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, AB. 8AB means you're taking 8 and multiplying it by A, multiplying it by B, right? So 8 is the coefficient. A and B are both variables and both factors. 8 is also a factor. And 8AB is the product, and also it's a term. So we're just trying to simplify these expressions into the smallest possible way we can write them. It makes it easier for us, and especially when we start combining like terms and the like, you'll see kind of how that works out. Okay, let's do some more examples. Example 3 says, find the product of 4f times 7g. It may be easier to see how we will use the fewest number of symbols and characters by expanding it first. So we're actually going to go ahead and break this apart. And when we break it apart, we have 4 times f times 7 times g. So now we can multiply the numbers, which is 4 and 7, which gives us 28, and then multiply the variables, which would be f, g. So that would be the simplest way of writing that. Okay, next example, multiply 3de times 9yx. We can expand that out. We can say 3 times d times e times 9 times y times z. We can multiply the numbers together. We end up with 27. And then bring back down the variables. 27 d, e, y, z. We don't have the answer because we don't know what those variables represent, but we do know that this would be the product. So if we knew what those letters represented, we'd be able to solve for that product. Okay, let's keep going. Variables always follow the numbers and should be written in alphabetical order. So you wouldn't, earlier when we said 4m, you wouldn't write m4. It doesn't work that way. The numbers come first. Okay, so let's look at this problem and go ahead and solve. So we have 5 times m times 3 times p. First thing, we're looking at the numbers. We're going to do 5 times 3, which is 15. And then mp is already in alphabetical order. We're going to keep it that way. 15 mp. So 15 mp. The numbers first, then the variables in alphabetical order. Okay, now I've got one last example for us to look at. Double the product of 6y and 3bc. Well, we can break this apart. First, we have 6 times y times 3 times b times c. We're going to multiply these together. 6 times 3 is 18. We're going to put the variables in order. So we're going to have b, c, y. And this is the product of these. Now, we have to double it. If you know what doubling means, you know it means to multiply by 2. Oh, can't use that. Got to use another symbol, right? So we're going to do 2 times 18. We're going to get 36 b, c, y. Okay, those are all the examples I have for you for now. We're going to look at some more in class and check out a couple of activities we can do with these problems. And I hope that helps a little bit. And thanks for listening. And how many times can I say and? Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.